It is so good to have you with me today. For those of you who are going to catch this on one of my social media channels, I would ask you to just do me a little favor. Would you like the video? Would you drop a comment? Would you share it with somebody? It just really helps to bring visibility to this whole concept of iridology and to the work that we are doing with it. Love to have you all here. This is so good. Today we are going to get into a somewhat contentious area of iridology. And we're going to talk about the history, and then we're going to talk about some of the myths and fables that have come out of that history. And we're going to look at eyes, and we're going to blow things out of the water and try to get the real truth, the goods out there. Because there's a lot of bad information on the internet about iridology. It's very interesting. If you use that new AI thing and you ask it to research iridology, it's going to come up with all the old and incorrect information. I've tried it. I just died laughing looking at the garbage it was giving back. So we're going to blow a lot of that out of the water today. This is very interactive. I encourage questions and comments, and we are going to, like I said, have some time together. Shanna is saying that is a bummer. It is a bummer that AI is only coming up with stuff that is not accurate. I don't know how much we can trust AI yet. Maybe eventually. My name is Judith Cobb. I am a level 3 certified iridology instructor and iridologist through the International Iridology Practitioners Association. IPA has a standard that all of their iridologists and all of their teachers have to recertify every 2 years. We have to do upgrade hours. We have to prove we know what we're doing. And that's why these badges that they issue only show 2 years worth of validity. I've been an iridologist since 1979 and have been studying this in many different ways all these many years. And so these badges are just the current validation of the work that I do. I am also a master herbalist and a natural nutrition clinical practitioner associated with these lovely organizations. What I like about these organizations and IPA is that none of the organizations that I'm affiliated with actually teach classes in and of themselves. And that to me is very important. You will see many instructors who will teach a class and will issue a certificate, not a certificate of attendance or completion, but saying you are now certified. That to me seems like a conflict of interest, because it's just saying the students have met my standards, which might be really good standards, but you don't know that. You have nothing to compare it to, very likely. And so to me, it holds a whole lot more water if a student has to pass a test or pass certain criterion from another organization. Chana says, something I find interesting about AI and iridology is that the word irides are used to open phones, passwords, codes, as they are viewed as individual as fingerprints. If that doesn't say irides don't change. I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely. We're going to talk about that today, Chana. We're going to talk about that myth of eyes changing. All right. So we are also going to maybe take a little peek at sclerology. We'll see where we end up. I don't know. Let's dive into the history here. And it's so good to see we've got some new people with us today as well. So welcome. Really appreciate you making the time to be with us. Please interact with us in the chat box, comments, questions, and I'll be asking for feedback and interaction as well. We know that iridology has been around for many, many years, way more than the modern iteration of it. We've got evidence of it from Egypt, India, China, and Greece. Aren't those places where all the good stuff came from? And so, but we also know that iridology evolves, right? We used to think, well, we didn't used to think, but it used to be believed that the earth was flat. We now know different. Research, evidence shows that the earth is round. Some people still believe the earth is flat. They fail to keep up with research, and that's a problem because, they're living in a paradigm that is not accurate. We need to remember that all science evolves. And in just about every field of science, what was once embraced as the truth has been disproved as research has moved things forward, right? And good scientists continue to ask good questions and do more research and continue to drive all science forward. Science is the art of asking questions. It is not the art of giving answers, because the answer depends on the quality of the question. You ask a lousy question on anything, you're going to get a lousy answer. Do you agree with that? That the validity of everything depends on the quality of the question, right? And so Amber says, hello from Texas Nurse here, questioning everything I was taught, or maybe better said, what was not taught. Yeah, Chan is agreeing with me that the quality of the question is a critical factor. So let's go right back to the very beginning, where a lot of people think modern iridology began. Story goes, a little boy in Hungary named Ignaz van Petzschle, 11 years old, caught or trapped a bird of prey, could have been an owl. We aren't quite sure. The story says it might have been an owl. And that somewhere in this process, the bird had a broken wing or a broken leg. The story goes on to say that Ignaz noticed as he was working with this bird that the bird had a black line develop, or a black line in its iris, and that as he nursed this bird back to health, this black line disappeared. So I'm not quite sure how he managed to get this, to capture this animal and keep it in confinement while it healed. But the interesting thing is he was only 11. That's not to say that he was lying. It's just to say what he did has not been replicated. We'll talk about that more in a minute. We also need to recognize that the structure of an animal iris, and particularly a bird's iris, is very different from a human iris. And so we cannot necessarily extrapolate from one to the other. However, you would think that with all of the bird sanctuaries that are out there now, where birds of prey are taken to be rehabilitated after they've been severely injured, you would think that if a line had appeared in Ignaz's owl's eye, that other veterinarians and veterinary techs who work with these injured birds would have seen the same thing and documented it, but nobody has. So I think what's the most important thing here isn't, did he see this for real? Did he imagine it? Was it a stray man? I don't know. What's the most important thing here is that he went on to become a medical doctor, and he began this bird incident spurred him on to start looking at human eyes, and to literally be drawing out the human eyes with colored charcoals and writing out their stories, because he was a doctor, right? And he began correlating. Can you imagine the painstaking labor of putting that kind of information together without a computer database? I mean, it blows my mind. So we love Ignaz because he started this. But we do know that even his uncle, August von Petzschle, recognized years later that Ignaz was looking at an owl's eyes and not that of a human, that he did not have the proper equipment to prove what had been recorded in the stories. And many people are saying, it's time to move forward and to really base our work on research. Chana in the chat box is saying he must have been a very patient man. Oh, I can only imagine. And they didn't know any other way of doing research except to observe and record and then compare notes. And so I think they were a different mentality than what we are. Like you say, more patient. He had a 2-power magnifying glass, a 2-power. I just can't imagine working with a 2-power. But he also couldn't understand why some people had a particular marking in their eye and had symptoms, and other people with the same marking did not have symptoms, and why some people didn't have the marking but had symptoms. He couldn't balance that out in his mind. And now we know it's because what we see in an iris is like 95% genetically based. He didn't know that. They didn't know much about genes back then. Then we have Pastor Neil Lilliquist, who also became a medical doctor, and his contribution to iridology is that he noted that when somebody had a very fine, very dense fiber structure, like we see in the eye image on the left, they could resist disease more easily. And if they got sick or if they had an injury, they could recover very quickly. Someone with a more open structure to their iris fibers had a more difficult time warding off disease and typically took longer to heal if they got sick or if they had an injury. Now, he said, and this is another one of the myths, he said he felt that things like these colors in the eye, the extra colors, we call them pigments, were due to toxic exposure, which could have been medications, it could have been environmental things. We now know that that is not true. We now know that all of the different pigments in the eye, regardless of their color, are some variation of melanin or another natural pigment that the body produces, and that these appear in the eye as a result of genetic influences, not as a result of toxic exposure. Okay, so am I challenging anything that you've heard already from other iridology teachers? If I am, give me a challenge in the comments box. Am I challenging anything you've heard anywhere else? Shanna says, I'm with you. Fantastic. And if this is challenging things you've heard elsewhere, that's good. That's exactly why we're doing this. And there's no shame in being challenged and investigating different ways of thinking about things, right? No shame in that at all. As a matter of fact, that's the sign of a really excellent student. Then we have Pastor Emmanuel Falca, who also mapped out the iris. So all of these researchers are creating their own maps. They're not talking to each other. They don't know that somebody else is doing this. They're all creating their own maps. So he also started defining what we now know as constitutions. He taught iridology. There is an institute in Germany called the Falca Institute, and they teach iridology. Now, it's interesting that in Germany, you have to be either a naturopath or a medical doctor to practice iridology. Does that say something about how valid this science could be, right? How valid it really is. Rudolf Schnabel, we don't have a picture of him, unfortunately. He researched pigment. So he was, again, looking at the yellows, oranges, rusts, browns that we see in an iris, the white that we often see in an iris, and was starting to figure out what they were telling him. He also looked at the pupil tonus, or the shape and size of a pupil. We like to think our pupils are round. That's not usually the case. And when a pupil is not round, it gives us more information, particularly about the functioning of the nervous system as it relates to the spinal cord and the spinal column. Rudolf was one of the first to use a microscope to examine an iris. Very cool. And now, of course, medical doctors, eye doctors, use a microscope, a slit lamp microscope, all the time, right? Rudolf Schnabel said this. Oh, and I love this that Rudolf said. It was no easy task, and those who believe or would like to believe that handling iridoscopy can be learned within a few weeks or even days are mistaken and do a disservice to a good cause. I will tell you that if you attend a weekend workshop or a 2 or 3 day workshop in iridology, and they give you a certificate saying you're a certified iridologist, they're lying to you and you're lying to yourself. You simply cannot learn iridology that quickly, not at a level that will do any good. Joseph Unger, I want to give him a hug. I want him for a grandpa. Doesn't he just look like a fantastic, gentle man? He was a student of Schnabel's. He studied with Rudolf Schnabel, and Joseph became a naturopath. Now, his main concern was that everybody who was doing iridology research and teaching iridology seemed to have their own verbiage. They seemed to have their own language. And he knew that was leading to mass confusion in the science and in the industry. He also knew that there were things being published that were theoretical, but they were being published as gospel true. And because of that, there was a lot of misinformation out there because the theory is not the answer. The theory is the question. And if people are accepting the theory as the answer, we got a problem. And he knew that students were reading these books and they were accepting the printed word about iridology before adequate research had been done on it. And so as he did research, he refused to publish his work until he had had it vetted by his professional peers. He wanted them to put his work through its paces to prove or disprove so that whatever he was publishing was the most accurate it could be. Then we have Joseph Deck. I think he looks like a movie star from the 1950s. I happen to be a black and white movie fan. And so, yeah, I could just see him in one of those black and whites just fine, right? Now, he was also a dedicated iridology researcher. He pioneered iridology photography, and he was also an instructor. We're going to come back to Joseph more in just a few minutes. Then we have Theodor Kriege in Germany again. And he again said, I hope that a later generation will succeed in establishing a single uniform system. We still aren't there yet. In spite of zealous efforts, these have so far not succeeded. So here we are, probably 100 years later, still struggling with this whole concept. So sad, so sad. He felt that iridology was a really good extra layer, an extra assessment tool to be used with other assessment tools like urine analysis, hand analysis, fingernails, tongue, feces. We could add to this things like traditional Chinese medicine, facial diagnosis, trichology. There's so many things that we can use iridology with to have them validate each other, right? Modernly, we have Bernard Jensen. We love Bernard. Doesn't he looks like he'd be a great grandpa too, doesn't he? And so I never had the privilege of studying with him, but my first iridology instructor had studied with him twice. He had a tough job. He had a really tough job. He learned about iridology, and then the Cold War, right? He had World War II and then the Cold War, and look at when he lived. And so he was not able to receive the ongoing research information from Germany. That was like, and Russia, there were places that were just locked down that were not letting information out, and America was not letting information in. So he kept it alive the way he knew it. And it was based a lot on the theories of the eyes change, we can wash pigments out of the eyes, things like that. He did a lot of good for a lot of people. And so I certainly will not diss him on that. And even the fact that he kept iridology alive in North America with what he knew is nothing short of a miracle. He was a one-man band here. He really was a remarkable hero to do that. Come the 1980s, we've got Harry Wolff, who was an American-born German. He could read German fluently, and he got his hands on a book written in German about iridology by Joseph Deck. Joseph was a real constitutional iridologist, and Harry started studying this and, wow, this is amazing. I really love this stuff. And he started going around and teaching little workshops. And then Bill Cardona, who at the time was a registered pharmacist, was getting kind of disillusioned with the fact that he was seeing the same patients over and over again in his pharmacy, and they were on the same medications or stronger medications, and they weren't getting better. So he started studying with Harry, and he learned the constitutional. He and Harry started teaching together. And then Bill went on to become a naturopath. Now, Bill is my constitutional instructor, and I just absolutely am so grateful to him for everything he has done to help me get to where I am. He has been such a blessing and such a mentor to me. Then we have Jensenian and Rayid and constitutional. Let's take a quick look at those just by comparison. So Jensenian, of course, was taught by Bernard Jensen. he taught that the iris changes when the body changes. So you would see what he called healing lines come into the eye. You would see the lacuna shape and size change. We now know that that doesn't happen, or if it looks like it's happening, we understand why it's happening, but it's not because of something the person has done. Traditional iridologists have often done iris readings. That feels a little hokey pokey to me to call it an iris reading, cold with no background information from the client. So you just sit there, they look at your eyes, they tell you what's wrong, and you're done. They don't want you to say a word. Traditional iridologists, so that's the traditional iridologist, a very different style from modern Jensenians, because Bernard Jensen's daughter-in-law, Ellen, has taken Bernard's teachings and has updated them to be constitutional, primarily constitutional, not completely, but primarily. So most of the people that Ellen teaches are now more constitutional. Rayed says that the emotional traits are genetic and are revealed by markings in the irides. So what I would interpret as a physical indicator, a Rayed or emotional iridologist will interpret more as a personality or emotional trait. And we can combine these. We can absolutely combine these. With Rayed readings may be done cold. Information gathered from the irides may be combined with personal and family history information for interpretation. When I first learned Rayed many, many years ago, I was taking a course. We had a certified Rayed instructor here in Calgary, and I got together a group of students, and we had Chris Smith, who has since passed away, teach us. She was such a lovely lady. And at that time, I was shooting iPhotos on slides, and we were doing slide projectors and, you know, the big screens on the wall with the slide projector. Yes, I am dating myself. I had pictures of my husband and myself and our first 5 children. At the time, we only had 5 kids. And so I asked Chris, would you like to do a family constellation study on the last day? She said, sure. So we took in the photos, and the slides rather, she loaded them into the carousel. And as she went through these, and remember, she'd only met me in this class. She really didn't know me from anywhere else. She'd never met my husband. She'd never met my children, except for my infant daughter, who was with me in the class because she was still breastfeeding. And the emotional stuff that Chris saw from the eyes and how she could describe the interpersonal relationships between us because of what she saw in these eyes was pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Yeah, I have not taken it much further than that, although I could, just because I do more of the physical. I find my clients come to me more as a herbalist and nutritionist, more for the physical than the emotional. Rayed was founded by Denny Johnson. He is still in it. He's really morphed it. Rayed iridology has gone through a significant metamorphosis since those early days. Jim Burgess does it now. John Andrews in England also does, I believe he calls it behavioral iridology. Constitutional originated with Joseph Deck and others. It's used by medical doctors in Italy, Germany, and Russia. There are correlative medical studies being done. This is really cool that the research is ongoing. We are not basing what we do solely on information that is 60 years old. We've got research being done by different iridologists now, and correlating it with genetic studies, with 23andMe studies, and so on. And we're getting some really interesting data. Constitutional teaches that the eyes are a reflection of the genetic structure of the body. So the eyes give us the predispositions. The irides don't tell us what is going wrong. It tells us what the genetic predispositions are. When we couple the predispositions with the symptoms, we then know what questions to ask to understand what's going wrong and why it's going wrong. Constitutional iridology is the foundation of what I teach as dynamic iridology. In dynamic iridology, we introduce some nutrition concepts and some herbal concepts, and I really strive to encourage my students to integrate what they are learning with what they already know. So if my students have an aromatherapy background, while they are learning iridology, I want them to be integrating aromatherapy into the iridology work. I've had a physical therapist. She integrates her physical therapy work with the iridology. Naturopaths, nurses, massage therapists, you name it. they are working to understand and to learn how to integrate iridology with what they do, because it is doable. Constitutional teaches us that iridology does not give us answers. It tells us which questions to ask. Other iris and sclera changes may continue to become visible with time. Now, when we see the iris change, that means we are seeing pigment build in the iris. That is under genetic influence. That is not from toxic exposure. The sclera, however, is very dynamic and will change under the influence of dietary, supplement, lifestyle kinds of work. And when we couple all of this together, it helps us to understand where we need to be asking questions, and that will help us to understand what kinds of work we need to be doing with the client. We want background information. Constitutional iridology is a holistic process. It is not I know everything, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know. It is very much, you've given me this information. This is what I see in your eyes. This is what I need to know further based on those first two batches of information. So we're always doing this complete cycle of what I see, what you say, what I ask, what you answer, what I see, what you say, what I ask, right? It's a complete cycle as we evolve what the client, how to help the client and what the client's needs are. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yeah, Chana says yes. Is everybody off getting a cup of tea? Amber says yes, good job. Excellent. Does the holistic perspective of this resonate with you? If it does, if you can spell the word resonate, Kat says it does. Fantastic. Fantastic. If this is resonating, let me know in the chat box. Give me resonates in the chat box. I know it's a long word, but you can do it. Okay, so I started learning iridology in 1979. And back then, constitutional iridology was not yet in Canada. We were still doing Jensenian. And so I did Jensenian for I did it really solidly for about 5 years. I did it kind of sort of for another 5 years before I went, this is nuts. This is not working. And I was getting ready to walk away. Let me share with you why. As a Jensenian, I would see an iris like the one you see on your screen. And I had been taught that every one of these, they called them lesions, that's a word I really dislike, was a pathological problem that was happening right now and needed to be addressed right now. That's a lot of problems. And we were taught that as we had results, as we did things and we were getting results, we would see these fibers appear in that space. Problem was, we were never taught about before and after photos. So I would see a client like this for the first time and I'd go, well, these are problems, but look, you're healing. I had no idea where they'd come from. I had no idea that if they were healing or not, but I was taught that that meant they were healing. And I was taught that as we continued to work, this would completely disappear. And we would just have these beautiful fibers sitting there instead. I never saw that. I still haven't seen it after over 40 years in the industry. I've never seen fibers magically appear. I've never seen we call these lacunae, which means empty space or unfilled space. I've never seen a lacuna disappear. These are inherited markings. These are inherited from the last 3 to 4 generations. And whether your client is having a problem there or not depends on their diet, their lifestyle, how they think, are they taking care, right? Their environmental influence. There's a lot of things. So this just says strong risk of, and our question needs to be, is there a personal or a family history of? Whatever. Is there a personal or family history of lung issues? Is there a personal or family history of thyroid issues? Right? Those are the kinds of questions these markings want us to ask, because we don't know if this person is having problems there or not unless they tell us. In constitutional iridology, again, these are inherited markings. They suggest an increased risk. But if the person is has a good lifestyle, if they are taking care of their body, good diet, they're keeping their emotional health and their spiritual health really good, they're physically active, they're doing the right things, they may completely be able to prevent any problems from ever manifesting in that area. Does that make sense? And I know this is absolutely true because I would see a person like this and I would say, well, you've got a problem. This is back when I was at Jensen. You've got a problem. You've got a problem. You've got a problem. You've got a problem. And they go, no, I don't. No, I don't. No, I don't. No, I don't. Well, what the heck? What is going on here? Right. Um, Sean is saying it would sure be interesting to look at a lot of professional athletes' thyroids. It would, wouldn't it? Yeah. And she's also saying this makes sense. Fantastic. Thanks, Shanna. I appreciate you playing with me in my sandbox. Really appreciate that. So when we see this, because we know this person has increased risks, in particular, this type of an eye structure has an increased risk of endocrine imbalances. So I believe this was a female. And so if it was, then we're looking for endocrine reproductive, blood sugar, adrenal, thyroid kinds of things. And so we're watching for those kinds of symptoms. Do the client symptoms fit into that box? If they do, we can dive deeper. If they don't, we can simply say to the client, this eye suggests you may be at an increased risk for these kinds of health problems if you don't take care of yourself. Here are the things you can do to be proactive. And then we can list off the diet and the lifestyle kinds of things, maybe the most important one or two dietary things that would be the best for supporting them. And we can empower them with this knowledge rather than giving them an undertaker's card and saying, well, you know, you're just a train wreck and it's going to be over pretty soon anyway. So here you might as well start planning. An ounce of prevention is truly worth a pound of cure, Shannon. Thank you for that. So as a Jensenian, seeing an eye like this, I would have said, oh my goodness, you are so full of toxins. We need to cleanse you. Oh, do we ever? And when we cleanse you, these eyes are going to be blue. Yeah, we're going to cleanse all that dirt and all that garbage right out of you. You're going to have blue eyes. Yeah, I said that to a few people in the early days. And you know, it absolutely, yeah, you don't do that. This pigment is genetically set. The different colors of pigment teaches us about different organs that want to influence different parts of the body. And that gives us more information because if we know, for example, someone like this, the brown that's in here suggests this person's liver wants to be messing with a lot of things. What symptoms has the person brought in that could be impacted by the liver being lazy or sloppy or inefficient? Oh, so maybe rather than cleanse, maybe we need to understand the function of the liver, how it could create those other symptoms in another organ, and then go in and support the liver and do some dietary correction to take the pressure off the liver so the liver can be happy again. And Chana says, because that's exactly what everyone wants to hear. You're full of toxins. How encouraging. Not, yes, I love Chana's sassy sense of humor because I agree with it 100%. So we also need to recognize that when we look at an eye like this, you know, we were taught that these lacunae would disappear, they would change size, they would change shape. But what we were never taught about was how our technology would alter a photo. So I want you to think about this just really carefully for a minute. When we have bright light, the pupil shrinks. The iris itself has all of these trabeculae. And when the pupil shrinks, the iris tissue gets stretched out. Imagine you've got a rubber band and it's it's nice and it's laid out. A piece of thread would work, piece of yarn, you've laid it out, it's nice and flat. That pupil is small, the yarn is stretched out. When the pupil gets big, the iris tissue gets compressed, but it doesn't telescope. Instead, imagine putting a piece of yarn on the table, and when you compress it, it starts to wrinkle. As it wrinkles, it looks like it's changing shape, but the ends are still anchored. They're not going anywhere, right? They're moving with what they're anchored to. Does that make sense? So what that means is that when the pupil gets bigger, this shape is going to be like a balloon that's filled with air, and it's going to be squished from the ends, which means that balloon is going to look fatter. When we start to pull it, stretch the balloon out, the balloon gets narrower. It still has the same volume. It hasn't really changed. It's just the compression and the extension make it look like it's changed. We were always taught as Jensenians that if this was getting longer and narrower, it was healing. There was never any teaching about technology and pupil size. And we now know that this is so, so important. Okay, so important. Again, we know that with constitutional, we're looking at things like the overall structure first. And we look very deeply at details as we need to, but we start with looking at the overall color, the different colors within this, the overall structure, how are the fibers sitting in the iris. That gives us enough information to do the first appointment. It really does. And then from there, we can start looking at individual things as we need to. For those of you who would be working mostly with brown-eyed people, as a Jensenian, I would have said, oh my goodness, this person is headed for a nervous breakdown. This person has parasites. We need to do a parasite cleanse right now. This person is just headed for trouble. Amber's asking, so recommended to examine with or without light, or just be aware of her contacts? So good question, Amber. I like that. I love questions. You want to do both. You want to you want to just observe your client's eyes, just talking with them, just normal conversation, you know, foot and a half or two away from them, see what color their eyes are, see what their pupil is like in normal light, because the pupil itself, the pupil size gives you a lot of information. And then you want to use an appropriate lighting setup eventually, probably not your first investment, to be able to illuminate the eye properly. And you need to then practice with that setup enough to understand how does your illumination setup affect the pupil size in an average person. Because you will need light, you'll need to play with the light to see different details in the eye, but you need to understand your equipment to know how it affects things. Chana's asking, how did you learn about the light camera apparatus changing trabecular pupil size? Trial and error, or bill care done? It was trial and error. It was one of those 2 a.m. couldn't sleep. I wonder what light does. And then I started experimenting on my family. Bless them for being my guinea pigs. Yeah. And we tried playing with different light and different angles of light and different intensities of light, different colors of light, and then took it into different computers, even the same computer on different monitors, to see how the monitors affected what we saw. And it's so important to understand your tech, because every tech is going to change the image somewhat. So this is a woman who is an Asian woman in her mid-30s. Her concern in coming to me was infertility. She and her husband are first-generation immigrants. And I will tell you that the Jensenians would have said nervous breakdown and parasites. Nothing could be further from the truth. Absolutely nothing. Okay. These lines and these rings work together to tell us that this is a woman who internalizes her stress. really internalizes it. The fact that she has this one extra little brown pigment right here tells me that she is likely has the MTHFR defect. Her medical diagnosis as we got into her first appointment was PCOS and type 2 diabetes, which I would have guessed ultimately. She was a petite little thing. She certainly didn't look like PCOS or T2D. But as I'm looking, I'm going, okay, she's got this little brown pigment. That's all it takes to think she might have MTHFR. And then when we look and we see that she's got, this is her right eye, that she's got radial furrows that suggest interrupted nerve feed to different organs. She's got a radial furrow going straight to her ovary. Huh. Interesting, right? So we know that she burns through her B vitamins at record speed, but if she gets the B vitamins, particularly folate and B12 in the wrong format, they are not going to be helpful and they may build up to become toxic. That is the MTHFR story for those who are under methylators, correct? And so as we started working, knowing this, looking at her diet, which was quite atrocious. She's only in her mid 30s and she's got this, which tells me that she has not been handling her carbs well. They're either going into cholesterol or triglycerides. And that she's going into T2D. Yeah, we don't want to see that. This is a corneal sign and we don't like to see this ever, but we typically don't see it until someone is over 60 years of age. So she's in her mid 30s, awfully young to be doing that. So what we did is we did everything we needed to here. We got her on a prenatal vitamin that had the methylated Bs. We supported her liver with N-acetylcysteine and a few other things. We cleaned up her diet radically. Bless her sweet husband. As I was going over diet, they wanted to get pregnant yesterday. They'd been trying for 3 years already. They didn't want to waste any time. So I hit them harder than I normally would. And as her face is getting longer and longer, and she's, how am I going to do this? Her sweet husband reached over and took her hand and he said, don't worry, sweetie. I'm going to take over all of the food preparation. You just eat what I cook for us. We're going to eat the same foods together. We're in this together. And I thought, I told her, you need to clone him and sell him. You will be stinking rich by the weekend, right? And that's exactly what they did. And we got her cycles balanced out from 90 days down to 32 days. Took us a few months to do that. And they conceived. She did not develop gestational diabetes. She had been told she absolutely would. She did not. She had an amazing labor and delivery. I think she was 4 hours start to finish, like for a first, and for a tiny woman like her, oh my goodness. At any rate, looking at her eyes, I was able to deduce those things and to understand the direction we needed to go, right? If I had been a ginsening iridologist, we still would have been thinking about parasites and working with nervous breakdown risk. I wouldn't have known to take it deeper and to look at liver function and hormone balance so much. Okay, so can we see changes in the irides? These are the eyes of my husband, bless his heart. He doesn't know I talk about him so much. Oh, yes, he does. And so this is his eye at the age of 42, and this is his eye at the age of 65. What are the differences you see? Give it to me in the chat. What are some differences you see? Amber saying having a hard time differentiating between used to do it this way, the incorrect, and what is actually correct, but this is all very new to me. Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. So you've got that open mind. We can work with you on that very easily. More pigment, changes in color. Age 65, that's a huge difference. Color is more vibrant, different light source pupil size. Okay, so let's talk about this. Totally different camera. This was a print film camera, and you can't tell that by looking. This is a 24 megapixel camera. This was an incandescent flash, which means more yellow. This is an LED flash, which means more blue. This also, this was an Olympus camera. This was a Canon. Camera brands shoot color differently. Now, being my husband, yes, I try to influence his diet. Am I successful? Maybe some of the time. And so with that, you have to know that I was not feeding him Twinkies and Coca-Cola. He has a very clean diet. We don't do coffee. We don't do alcohol. We do almost no white sugar, except for a tiny piece of cheesecake once a week. That's our date night. We have a lot of vegetables. We use mostly wild game for meat, so it's pretty clean. You know, we raise as much of our produce as we can organically. Of course, it's never enough to last the year. But what do you see from age 42? Look down here and look down here. Do you see how the pigment has accumulated? So that's one thing. We've got the accumulation of pigment in spite of the fact that I've always got him on a herbal program. I'm always very gently suggesting he needs to eat more vegetables, right? Things like that. The color difference you see is the difference between the camera and the light source. This was a dimmer light, so the pupil is much larger. This is a brighter light, so the pupil is much smaller. That is going to impact how big, how wide many of these markings appear. So they have not healed. We have simply stretched out the iris tissue. Does that all make sense? So what does this tell me? If that makes sense, give me makes sense in the comments box. I really am loving the interaction here, by the way. Keep it up. The more you play with me, the more you'll get out of me. Wouldn't it be no matter what his diet lifestyle was, the pigment would accumulate? Correct. Absolutely, Chana. The pigment will accumulate. And we've got makes sense. Amber says, not sure the appropriate terms, but at the top of the iris, it looks like it's sliced. So are you talking about this right here? Amber, is that what you're looking at? Or are you looking at this? So are you looking at the circumference or are you looking at the radial? Between the iris and the pupils, yeah. So that is this. When it's compressed, it's going to look deeper. It's going to look deeper. That's going to make it look darker. Okay, so yeah, it does look sliced. That suggests an interruption in the nerve feed between or into that organ. And he had that back here. Because my equipment is all handheld, it's not always perfectly level. And that's why this marking that looks like it's at about 59 minutes over here looks like it's at 1 minute. The image is just slightly rotated. Okay, so this pigment says that over this ensuing 23 years, his liver has been genetically programmed to begin to be a bit of a troublemaker. And we see that in some of his symptoms, in spite of how well I try to take care of him. His liver is wanting to be a bit of a troublemaker, right? And so we are constantly being vigilant, thinking, okay, so it's doing this now. That means we need to appease it. We need to balance it with this other thing. Okay, Veronica says, I'm listening to everything. I noticed that inferior below the collarette, the darker pigment at age 65. Absolutely brilliant, Veronica. I'm so glad you can see that. All right, so we accumulate pigment. We don't disperse pigment. We also, if you look carefully, you are going to see that even fibers, like we've got this weird little fiber right here, it's still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's still there, right? We've got this little one here, which is sitting in the shadows right here, right? So we've got all the fibers are still there. They haven't moved. This is my eye. In 2017, I got a new camera. I was playing with it, doing photos. So we got this great one. In 10th of March, 2019, I broke my wrist in 2 places and ended up in surgery, 2 plates, 12 screws installed into 2 different bones in my wrist. And what we can see is that's the arm area right there. We see the arm area right here. It has not changed one little bit, not even a tiny little bit. It is still there. And then down here, we've got the 5th of August, 2019, because I broke my arm again 10 weeks later. This time I broke the olecranon right off. And I wasn't quite as on the ball to check my camera settings, but you'll see that we still don't have any changes. So when people say they can see a broken bone in the eye, they can see a surgery in the eye, I don't see how. Here we go again, May 2019 again. Sorry, it goes this way around, clockwise. May 2019, broke my elbow on Mother's Day, visiting my son. Happy Mother's Day. And then this was a little while later, looking at the healing of everything, but the fibers are the same. There's no black line in between. I guess I'm not an owl. Yeah, right. And it's still all the same. And so something that is not genetic will not show up in the eyes. I can't pass that broken arm on to a child, right? Carolyn's saying, is it possible for a pigment to develop on a break? I haven't seen it. I've done studies on my kids that have had broken bones and my kids that have had different surgeries, and we don't see a pigment develop on a break or on a surgical reflex point in the eye. So I haven't seen that. If there's a pigment, I would suspect it was either there before the injury or the surgery, or that it developed significantly later and it's a genetic thing, not a result of the break. So can we cleanse these pigments out? No. Harry Wolf says, in fact, it's bogus and a dogma only found among some holdouts from the Lindlar, Kreitzer, and Jensen schools of thought. The notion that certain metals, minerals, toxins routinely show up as diagnostic indicators in the iris has long been refuted and proven unreliable. There is no evidence to support the notion that heavy metal toxicity is measurable in the iris, likewise drugs and candida. The dark spots are genetically predetermined, as is the overall color scheme. So Amanda's saying, how would a practitioner be able to tell me that I have structural issues in specific areas without information? They might have a bit of ESP, literally. There are medical intuitives who may know that, and they may be using iridology as a way to try to explain to people what's going on without telling the person they are a medical intuitive. Someone might look at my photo and say, oh, you broke your arm, and that's true now, but it wasn't true 5 years ago, and those markings were still there. So if they said back then, well, you broke your arm, it's like, well, no, I didn't. Haven't yet. Not planning on it. Really, seriously not planning on it. Right. So I don't know how they do it. I truly don't. I've heard of people that do that, and I do think that they might be medical intuitives, and they're just not telling the people they're working with that they are medically intuitive. That's my best assessment. These are taken with two different cameras, or sorry, the same camera, two different lighting sources. I have two illuminators that I can put on my camera on the same day. And you can see, even with the different light sources, the difference in color, certainly the difference in brightness, so the difference in pupil size. See how even the intensity of the color changes the intensity of the pigment. So we have to know how our equipment works. Can we see parasites? No, we cannot see parasites. Unless you've got one of those creepy ones that actually lives under the surface of the eye, then you can see that in the sclera. But the iris itself is not going to show us parasites. So which iridology chart is correct? That's a good question. Now, if you would like to have a copy of this one, this is the one that I developed with, let me just make sure I'm sending this to the right. There we go. Based on Bill Cardano's chart, which he hadn't updated in a while, and research meant it needed to be updated. So I've given you a link in your chat box if you want to download this one. You'll notice this is different from a lot of the other maps. This only includes tissues that have a metabolic impact. So it doesn't include necessarily the arm or the leg or the earlobe, right? It includes tissues that that will have an impact on the rest of the body. That is why this is constitutional. We don't get hung up on things like a broken finger, right? We just don't. So, is brown pigment in a blue iris an indication of toxicity? Is yellow pigment an indication of sulfur buildup? Shanna, good answer. Good answer. No and no. The brown pigment suggests that the liver wants to have an influence on other organs. The liver does over 500 different jobs. It can affect any organ it wants to affect. And so we need to be aware of the fact that it wants to affect those organs, because if that organ starts showing symptoms, then that organ might need a little love, but the liver is what really needs some disciplining, right? Is yellow pigment an indication of sulfur buildup? No, it is not. And so yellow, as Chana is suggesting, is more an indication that the kidneys want to be troublemakers. They want to be out of balance. And again, we can deduce from what we see in the eye what organs are going to struggle most because the kidneys don't want to do their job. And then we can, yes, support those kidneys, but absolutely have a conversation with, we can support the organs that are being affected, but then we absolutely want to have a conversation with those kidneys to help them behave themselves. And that might be a lifelong process, because this is genetics we're looking at, right? It might be a lifelong process. Is white in a blue iris an indication of scarring or stagnant lymph? The answer is, wait for it, folks, no. It's an indication the body wants to be over acid. And depending on where we see the white, it may suggest that there may want to be some congestion in the lymphatic system, right? And you can ask the right questions to understand if the lymphatic system is working. You can ask the right questions to understand if the body is over acid and therefore inflamed. And then you can make appropriate suggestions, right? The white in the eye is not the result of having too much acid in the diet. It's what the body wants to do, and it will take even a low acid forming diet and will try to turn it into acid. We need to do things to keep it from going that direction. Right? Does that make sense? If that makes sense, give me a makes sense in the comments box. I'm going pretty deep today because I suspect many of you, because I've met many of you through the dynamic iridology group, many of you have got an anatomy and physiology background. And so I feel like I can go a little bit deeper than I normally would on an intro mini class like today. Can we diagnose diseases using iridology? Well, I suppose if you're a licensed medical doctor, you could. I wouldn't recommend it, right? And I love that Chana says definitely nopers. Yeah, we don't name diseases from the eyes. Again, if you've got a medical license to diagnose disease, you can maybe do that, but the eyes don't give us disease names. They help us to understand where the imbalances are most likely to happen. That conversation with our client helps us to understand what imbalances are happening, and that informs the kinds of things we are going to teach our client to do. I mean, we used to, as a Jensenian, I was diagnosing left, right, and center, and I was wrong so much, so much. Bill Cardona says iridology cannot be used to diagnose. It is a unique assessment tool to gain understanding of the blueprint of the body, including tendencies towards illness patterns or assessment of resiliency and resistance against negative influences. But diagnosing the presence of a disease, of illness, the presence or status of illness or disease is never appropriate. All right, so there we go. China says, so glad you didn't go to prison and that you aren't presenting this from jail. Yeah, pretty much, right? Pretty much. So questions, let's talk about learning iridology. A couple of you are already my students. Some of you are new to me, and I'm just so glad you're with us. How long does it take to learn iridology? Well, it takes more than a weekend. When I teach iridology, I teach it as a 20-week course We meet once each week for about 2.25 to 2.5 hours to do a live interactive web class. Then you have the week to practice and study. Veronica says it is lifespan. Yeah, it really, you could keep developing it that long. To learn it at a clinical level, minimum of 20 weeks. And then if you want to certify, there's a process that comes after that. Can I earn a living with iridology? If you have another modality to couple with it, you absolutely can. Now, why do I say that? Iridology is the assessment tool. When you look at someone's eyes and you're working with them, you need to be able to then teach them what to do. And so you need nutrition or herbology or something to coach them along. Telling someone that they are broken is not useful unless you can help them fix it. So yeah, if you've got another modality that you can couple with iridology, absolutely. I found a course that is taught from books and videos. Is that good enough? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. The reason I say that is because from a book or a video, you can't learn all the nuances. Chana says there's no support that way. I've had many students who have been certified by other instructors. Some of them had live online instruction. Some of them had face-to-face instruction. Some of them did books and videos and they got certified, but they don't feel confident. They didn't learn the nuances. They learned to identify markings. They didn't learn to understand the meaning of the markings and how the markings integrate with each other and how the client's symptoms influence how you interpret the markings and all of that. And so, no, it is not good enough. You want a teacher. I'm telling you, you do. You want a teacher who will give you feedback, who will make you think through things, who will be there for the long haul, not just for the class. I've had so many students that have certified elsewhere. When they went back to their teacher, the teacher said, "Oh, you'll figure it out." Okay, how do you figure it out if you don't know where to look or how to look or even what to look for? How do you figure it out? And that's why I do long haul support for my students and my grads, even after they are certified. That is the dynamic iridology assessment system. It is the only live online fully mentored course for nutritionists, herbalists, naturopaths, RNs, massage therapists, NDs, physical therapists, chiropractors, you name it, who want to streamline their clinical work without sacrificing client care. We don't want to add a modality to your skill set that's going to take you an extra 2 hours to assess your client with, 2 hours that you probably won't get paid for. We want to teach you how to do this in the scope of your sessions with your clients so that it actually speeds up your assessment, helps you to be more accurate and more precise, and helps you to build programs that your client can stick with, helps you to build programs step by step, one appointment to the next, right? Because you want your clients to be successful. And they won't ever be successful if you give them 27 pieces of homework at once, right? Chana is saying she highly recommends. She is one of my students right now. So I appreciate you saying that, Chana. Thank you so much. It's always nice when my students are loving what they've got. Judith as a teacher challenges me and is such a great teacher, is what Chana's saying. Thank you, Chana. Thank you so much. Our next course is starting on January 25th. So if you're thinking, I have anatomy and physiology under my belt, I want to look at the possibility of adding iridology as a skill to use in my clinic with my clients, then I am going to encourage you, schedule a time to have a conversation with me. This is, I call it a virtual cup of tea, because what we do in these sessions isn't strong arm you into trying to enroll. It's not my purpose here. If you don't want to be in the class, I don't want you in the class. I mean, that's just the honest, I don't need your money that badly, right? And so the purpose of this conversation that I want to have with you one-on-one over Zoom is to make sure you've got your A&P, to assess what your goals are, and then to have a good look at the course to see if this course is a good fit for you and if you are a good fit for the course. And if we discover that, yes, this is a good fit, as both Veronica and Chana, who are with us today, will attest. If it's a good fit, only then will I offer you the link to enroll. I have many people that I have a conversation with where they're not ready. This is not the right time. It is not the right space. They don't have the prerequisites. They're thinking iridology is something that it's not, and they don't get an invitation. I coach them in other ways so that if they should decide to have another conversation at a later date, they might be ready to join the course. So Chana says, come join if you're a good fit. Fantastic. So again, it's not a high pressure sales meeting we're having. It's just a cup of tea to figure out which direction, and if it's a good fit, I will invite you. Mike Knapp is a naturopath in Arizona. I asked him, why did you take my class? He's a naturopath, right? And he says, the interactive online platform with an experienced teacher and practitioner. You said the fundamentals of iridology could be learned in this format. And that was what was delivered, plus a lot more on how to integrate it directly into current practice. I am very happy with this training, so thank you. No sense in you learning a modality that you don't know how to integrate. So that is a part of the course. It is teaching you, getting you to stretch your mind to be able to integrate this easily and seamlessly into your practice. And actually, I have you start working with your own clients, looking at their eyes by the end of the second lesson. Not that you'll know a whole lot to help them, but it starts teaching you how to work it into your sessions with your clients, and it starts getting your clients used to you looking at their eyes, right? Such an important skill to be practicing really early on. If you wait till the end of the course thinking, I'm going to learn everything I can, and then I'm going to certify, and then I'm going to integrate it, you will fail on integrating it. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. If you start integrating it when I tell you to at the end of the second lesson, you will have a much higher degree of success. My goal is your success. That's what it comes down to. So again, if you are thinking, this sounds interesting. I've got anatomy and physiology. I've got the college level anatomy and physiology. I can come up with proof of that. Whether you're if you're a licensed massage therapist, a registered nurse, a chiropractor, currently licensed, any of those currently licensed, a medical professional currently licensed, your license will count as A&P for your certification credentials with IPA. If you don't have a current licensure, they're going to need to see a transcript that shows the anatomy and physiology as a separate course with a grade of over 80%. Okay, just so you know what you're up against here. That's not my standard. Well, it is, but it's also IPA standard. And so again, if you're thinking, could be interesting, go ahead and use that link that I sent, tinyurl.com/dynamic-iridology. Let's schedule a 45-minute chat. If we discover after 5 minutes that we're just not having fun, we'll end it early. But if we need the full 45, we've got it. And I'll show you the inside of the classroom. We'll walk through everything you get, all of the support you get, and we'll talk about how this would integrate in your practice. So with that, my friends, thank you so much for playing with me in the chat box and on this webinar today. I've truly appreciated you being here with me. And yeah, if anyone has any questions or comments, please reach out to me. And I would love to chat with you. Take care and have a good day. You are all very, very welcome. Bye for now.